Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is Chad with the Bot Podcast, where we interview movers, shakers, and innovators and talk all things conversational user interfaces. I'm your host, Chad Oda, and today we have a very special guest, Ali Loghmani. He is the founder and CEO of Planner.ai. Planner.ai is a chatbot solution integrator, providing domain-specific personal assistance and smart coaching chatbots. Ali is also an experienced entrepreneur with a successful exit from his previous startup. Interestingly enough, Ali's first paying job was actually being a script developer and tester using Voice XML and VoxML for IVR systems. So maybe some of the predecessors of voice systems. So to that, Ali, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity and glad to be here with you.
Absolutely. So before we get started, I always like to ask sort of a unique question based on our guest's background and history. So, I saw that you had founded your first startup and that was actually a successful exit. Can you maybe talk to like one major lesson that really has stuck with you through all these years that you still find applicable today from your time in that first startup?
Sure. I remember the moment that I saw the first demo, the first usable demo to the investor. He really liked it. And it was the moment he said, aha, we could scale this. I did not know anything about 0 to 1. I did not know anything about lean startup. I was 22, and it was a very long time ago. And none of these books were out at that time. Ajax was not even out there yet. So imagine how early it was. And that lesson stuck with me that, okay, you need to ship products fast. One of the big major failures from that first startup was our inability to scale in the market. Although we managed to do an early exit and become part of the investing company, it was a merger, but we did not hit the numbers in terms of sales that we wanted to. But again, listen, you learn from your mistakes.
Absolutely. Cool. No, I think that's great advice. I think, in any initial startup, it's always like these initial growing pains, and it's just like these really big risks and leaps we're taking, and then we see some data, and then it's like, okay, time to course correct. So I think that's really prudent advice. Sort of moving into sort of the chatbot voice conversation. Maybe talk a little bit about your company and what's the specific customer need or market opportunity that you guys are looking to address right now.
Sure. Well, the inspiration behind Planner was that it's really difficult to get to the information that you're looking for. And look at the search experience right now. It starts with a query that you plug into any modern search engine. And that takes you to a search result page. Now let's call that search result page a search result canvas. And you click on one of the links and you're taken to a landing page. The moment you are redirected to a landing page, you lose all your search functionality, right? Whether you are on, let's say, a desktop or a laptop or on your pad or cell phone, the moment you lose your search functionality, all you have to do is to scroll up and down. If you are on your cell phone, you cannot do Control F, or your desktop or laptop, you can do Control F to get to the paragraph that you need. Now, imagine you are a blog from Morgan Stanley, or let's say you are Mayo Clinic, right? What is the likelihood of me as a user going back to Google and searching for something else on top of my first query and getting back to the original company's website? It's the odds are not in the favor of the company's website. In other words, if you might have the post already sitting somewhere in your repository, but when I go back to Google and change my search query, it's not really likely that I would get back to your company again. I might be redirected to someone else's website. Now, you have a ton of these posts that you have aggregated and produced and curated over a few years, but these are not readily available to a user when someone lands to a landing page. In other words, a landing page is like a prison for that particular post. We cannot drill into the repository or the aggregated repository of that company. So this is, I looked into this and said, you know what? It is not cool. I should be able to ask follow-up questions. It was maybe 8 years ago. And if I cannot ask follow-up questions, then what is this search doing? It is just taking me from my query to a landing page. And that led to a prototype, a pet project that I did, a failed startup. And then in 2015, I said, you know what? It is time. Let's quit my full-time job. Let's just, take the blue pill and go down the rabbit hole. I don't know, screw it. Let's see what happens. My wife doesn't like me. She hates me when I say this story over and over again, but that's the truth. And I took a leap of faith, and I said, there should be a better way to do this. And that was the inspiration behind creating a conversational personal assistant or an autonomous domain expert, subject matter expert. And over the past few years, what I've learned mostly about chatbots is that you have to make sure that you can scale easily. If you do not scale, you'll die very soon. And there's a lot we could talk about this, but what we do, we create domain-specific chatbots. It has to be narrow AI, it cannot be general, not there with the kind of technologies that we have. And to be able to scale, you have to focus on a niche, on a narrow domain. And we have developed our own platform for this, and I'm more than happy to share more if you feel that it's something that you would like to know.
Cool, absolutely. I think you brought up a really interesting example, because it's just like they're almost like search engines are like rudimentary chatbots, right? We put questions in there and they give us results. But you make a really good point, because it's just like Google is really good at doing that. But then when we jump into a website, oftentimes whatever search engine technology they have embedded in that website is very bad, right? And in addition to that, I can't ask successive queries that are tied to each other that results from my initial interest in being on that blog post or article or whatnot, right? So it's almost like you're addressing two different components. Like maybe one of them is like, just like the seamlessness of using voice or seamlessness of using chatbot in regards to like reducing that friction point for an end user to intuitively try and get information. But the other component, and I think we were talking a little bit about this before we jumped on the call or the podcast here, was it's also sort of the AI component, right? What is that component that is necessary to be able to, extract all this data from your knowledge repository and organize it in a way that now is accessible by those various modalities. So I think that's a really interesting point that you're making there.
Sure. I'd be glad to expand a bit more. So allow me also, before we dive deeper into this, let me share that, go back to the blog example. The moment you move away from the search result canvas to a landing page, you lose your search functionality. But chatbots, they have this ability to merge these two canvases into one. So your search result canvas is the same as your landing page. And my friend, this alone makes the chatbot user experience superior compared to what conventional search engines do. There's nothing about technology, it's about search, it's about the user experience of it, right? You can create, let's say, a rudimentary search engine with, technology from 20 years ago, and yet be better than what Google does, because you provide follow-up queries, right? And as a matter of fact, I had a demo 3 months ago at Elasticsearch, and I showed to audience that using Elasticsearch, you can create follow-up queries without any AI. With no AI, you search, you type in your query, you're given a set of results, then you add to your query, change your query on top of the results that you already have. And you can drill in like a funnel to get to the set of let's say records or leads that you're looking for, let's say for a CRM. Now, this feature is not there in the search in Google or Bing or other search engines. And there's nothing wrong with their technology. They are ahead of the pack by light years. They have the best technology ever. It's about the user experience. And because you do not have the general AI or that kind of technology yet, it's really hard for them to create a horizontal solution, right? So that creates a window of opportunity for domain-specific chatbots to get into domains, to get into niches, and create domain-specific solutions. Solutions that could provide deep, frictionless, and natural UI, natural user experience to consumers. And that would, that is something that we're really excited about.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on that. And, I think it's slowly becoming like, the sentiment of people that are really involved in the chatbot and voice space right now, you can go broad, right? And we see broad instances like, Google Assistant or Cortana, and it could talk to a lot of these broad things, but what it doesn't have is depth. And I think you're absolutely right. And, I think there are sort of new technologies coming onto the market right now where they are specifically creating artificial intelligence to drill down very deep, to be utilized for voice or chatbot instances. So that makes total sense. And, I think that's really encouraging that, people are beginning to sort of move in that direction. But maybe starting from, a few years ago, because I know you've been interested in this space for some time, how did you initially get interested or involved in this space? And what was like that catalyst for you?
Sure. Multiple, I know what, Marvel is very inspiring. Iron Man, Jarvis. But to be a little bit more serious, I remember when our first startup failed with my brother. My second startup failed with my brother. It was an event planning startup, and it was really hard to accept that, okay, this was a big failure. We lost a lot of money and time and blood and sweat. Now, what went wrong? Apart from the market and the product market fit and whatnot, I said there should be a better way to search for products. And by the way, for the audience, for folks who do not know what I did at my second startup, we created a party planning to connect brands to private parties. Let's say if you're throwing a Super Bowl party, then at your backyard, maybe we could get Heineken or Bud Light to sponsor your party. Or if you are throwing a birthday party for your daughter, maybe we could get Disney to sponsor your party. And it was a two-sided marketplace. And I said there should be a better way to search for these parties and to search for these brands in a more conversational fashion, in a more interactive fashion. And that was an incentive to go deep into this. And then I created a party planning concierge. And in that, it could, explain your query, your very long query, like, I'm planning to throw my wedding anniversary in 3 months in South Lake Tahoe for 20 people, and my budget is so and so, and I would like the theme to be, California, right? And so, right, if I could put this query into a system, if this system could give me a package of things, that would save me a lot of time. I would not need to go to multiple websites, do multiple queries, and everything would be done in one package. It was early 2012 or so, the timeline, 6 years ago, and then maybe 7 years ago, and it failed. It failed because after 2 to 3 years of development and prototyping and looking for product market fit, I realized that nobody would ever type such a very long sentence. And at that time, voice was not as big as it is right now, although I knew about nuance from 20 years ago, but to be commoditized this well, it was not available 3-4 years ago, or 6 years ago when we first started. And in 2015, I said, all right, you know what? It cannot be this long. It has to be conversational. But guess what? Over the years, I realized that it has to be multimodal. So long story short, there are times that I, as a user, would prefer to say something, to say a very long query. And I do it right now. For instance, I would ask Alexa or Google Home, hey, Google, what is the temperature today in South Lake Tahoe at 4 o'clock? It's a long query, and Google would give me the answer, right? But sometimes, you feel that, okay, it would feel more natural if I just tapped on a button, because I feel very lazy at the moment. or my span of attention is very short. I can't type a very long sentence. Or sometimes to keep my privacy, I'd rather, type a very long query. Or maybe sometimes it's more natural, or it's practically impossible to describe your query using AI, using UI elements. For instance, if you're shopping online and you want to say, I'm looking for a dress that would match my corduroy jacket. How could you possibly do that on any website, Macy's or Nordstrom or Saks Fifth Avenue or any of these great websites? It's impossible. Or even on Amazon, you have the best technology for e-commerce, right? So asking too many questions, asking very hard questions. And I remember I attended this TED Talk, and this gentleman, I forgot his name, from Google X, taught me a very good lesson. He said, we reward ideas that would break a project early on. So we celebrate failure. And I said, well, let me ask very tough questions and let me see if I can break this thing immediately. And at the same time, I had this love and passion and infatuation about personal assistance, because I had this conviction that the future of the internet is going to be an aggregation or let's say an orchestration of many personal assistants. So there was like a battle between demons and angels, breaking things and fixing things in my head. And that brought me to a point to say, all right, you know what? It is about the user. Put the user in the center of the universe. And throughout the conversation, let the user decide how she or he is willing to communicate with the system. Is it going to be through voice? Is it going to be through typing a very long query? Is it going to be by tapping things, or a mixture of all of the above? And this feels to be the most compelling and sustainable scenario, that as long as you're multimodal, as long as the user is in the center of the universe, then it's a good thing. It looks like a solid story. And about the UI aspect of it, please feel free to cut me whenever you felt that I'm going way.
No, this is great. This is great.
Sure, but the AI aspect of it, I realized, I remember in early days of the internet, when you wanted to sign up for a website or fill up a form, you had to, back then we did not have agents, right? There was no spa or anything like that, single page application. You have to go through something called a wizard. You have one step, and then a second step, a third step, maybe 10, 20 steps. For enterprise applications, for ERPs, my first startup, it was crazy, right? So you had too many steps, and if you would forget something, that was really difficult to go back. The best analogy that I have for it is, have you ever been to San Francisco Airport, SFO?
Yeah.
There's a monorail there, right? A few months ago, I was there and said, wait a second, this is an autonomous car. It is an autonomous car. There's no driver, but how come we're not calling it an autonomous car? Because the degree of freedom there is one, right? Degree of freedom is one dimension, just one dimension. Now, compare this to autonomous car that people are talking about right now. What is the degree of freedom? I don't know. It's crazy, right? And now Uber is talking about 3D transportation. Now, when I look at this, I'd say, okay, too many variables, your space model is going to explode, and now how are you going to model everything? Maybe it's better to reduce the degree of freedom so you could manage everything. And that would inherently make people more comfortable about the hazards of autonomous driving. Because if there are fewer cases that could go wrong, then people would say, all right, I can trust this better. Now, when it comes to Uber's autonomous driving scenario versus Tesla's, I would say I'll go with Tesla, which is under the ground, because there are fewer cases that could go wrong. Now, by reducing the degree of freedom, we can provide more automation, if you will. Now, it is exactly the same case. Back in the day, we did not have any AI. There was no way to use NLP like the way we're hoping to use. So the degree of freedom was, reduced to, let's say, one dimension, a wizard. Now with Ajax, user experience has changed. With parallax and all that, you get to feel that things are rendered before your eyes in a more interactive fashion, if you will. But adding AI to it, you see that you can add more degrees of freedom. You can have more dimensions to jump onto when you are, communicating with the system. Now, when you say, okay, it's sort of an oxymoron. When you say, I have freedom to say whatever I want to say, but at the same time, I don't have general AI to handle whatever the user says. So how do I manage this? And this is when, product management comes into the picture. You have to make sure that you can conduct the attention of the user in such a way that user stays within your manageable dimensions, within your realm of, the space that you've created. And once user gets to the borders of your space model where you are not able to, let's say, handle border cases, then that's when you have to have fallback scenarios. And that's when you have to say, okay, I have to hand you over to a system. In other words, looking at it from a business point of view, if you're running a business, what are the states in which your business feels comfortable to trigger an automated process, right? If you're running a factory or if you're running an old business, there are many states, right? But there are some states that you would say, all right, this is an exceptional case and I need to call the manager, right? Exactly the same. Take these, scenarios and put it in your chatbot. So what essentially a chatbot does, it takes an action, maps it to a state to which your chatbot can automatically respond. That's all. That's what an NLU component does.
No, I think that's a great perspective. So from what I understand, the initial sort of metamorphosis sort of came from that past startup you had worked on, and then you sort of spent a lot of time and research thinking about like these problems from a user experience perspective, from just making the user happy and giving flexibility. And then from that, it seems to me that you then spent more time thinking a lot about, okay, well, what modality is it going to be, and what does the AI component, and what is viable, what is feasible. So from that, once you entered this space, what were some of like the initial successes or wins that you saw that sort of encouraged you and kept you motivated to say, what, I think there's something here more than just my own intuition, that I'm sold. I'm going to continue in this space.
Sure. I remember a good mentor of mine, Gregory Renner, back in late 2015. I attended an AI talk at a meetup, and then he was talking about Keras and TensorFlow, and he said, if you're trying to learn AI, don't be intimidated by how complicated it may look. Jump into it and you will learn fast. And I took the leap of faith and started learning about Keras and TensorFlow. And TensorFlow was brand new. TensorFlow was introduced in November 2015, if I'm not mistaken. So it was just maybe 20 days after that. And I started learning about Keras and TensorFlow and things like that. And after a few months, I developed my first chatbot. And that was an early success. It was frequently asked question off of a 401k blog, the FAQ blog about 401k. What is 401k? How is 401k different from Roth? How is it different from Roth IRA? How is it? I'm changing my job. What are the things that I need to consider? Things like that. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. How is this working? I had word embedding in place. I was using CNN and convolutional neural nets, and I couldn't believe my eyes. And then I said, all right, you know what? This will work. And before that, I played a little bit with API.ai and Assistant.ai. Back then, it was called API.ai, and they were not acquired by Google yet. And Ilya, my good friend, is a champion of chatbots. He's now heading the dialog flow team at Google. And I talked to him and said, yeah, this is the way of the future. And in the next 5 years, we will have, and we both agreed that back then, it's like 2 years from now, we will have these search engines orchestrating or working as puppeteers of these small personal assistants managing requests from users. And as of right now, as we're talking, if you talk to Google Home, or if you talk to Alexa or Lewis for that matter, they will redirect you to these small domain-specific personal assistants. But the first early success was, the fact that I could put together an FAQ by developing custom code from ground up, not using API.ai or with that AI, because I knew that if you wanted to create something viable and solid, you had to have control over the entire dashboard, all the knobs and switches that you can play with. And there are many knobs and switches, but when you go to, let's say, an API, and by the way, I had used dialogic boards back in the day, like a very long time ago. Using APIs to develop telephony applications was not easy. It's not. I'm sure it's a lot easier now, but still, when you're dealing with APIs, you would need a team behind that API. Even right now, if you use Dialogflow with .ai, you need 2 or 3 developers. You need some UI folks. You need maybe a tester, maybe a project manager. Well, offshore on site, that is like 5, 6 to 10 people. I don't know, 6 months to a year, budget 500,000 to $1 million, and that would give you a toy, essentially, or maybe something that would work, more than a toy. But are you willing to go down that road? A lot of people are not feeling comfortable making such an investment right now. But I see a lot of people, scratching their head right now. I feel that I would love to do it, but I'm not really sure if I am sold yet. But they're looking at it. And I said, all right. I knew it back then, the experience of working with dialogic boards and other APIs for that matter. A voice API, I said, okay, you know what? Keras is the way to go. TensorFlow is the way to go. And now, with the benefit of the hindsight, surprisingly, that was a good decision. Now, we're talking about successes. I expanded, that FAQ into a flowchart-based, a dialogue-based system by the end of 2016. So my chatbot could conduct conversations down the retirement path. Are you retiring? So what's your monthly salary? Or is your company matching your 401k? What is your raise, or what is your projected raise over the years? And it would ask questions, and it could switch. It could handle context switching from one conversation to another. And I started showing it to people to find the right product market fit. I was trying to talk to the banks and whatnot. That was an early success. But soon later, I realized that, oops, how do you scale this baby now? Because, ouch, you're creating dialogues. But what if something went wrong? What if, you can switch from one dialogue to another, but what if it was easy to make the chatbot go haywire, and essentially it was not a very scalable. So that's when I said, all right, that's a question for which I need to find an answer, or this would not fly.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point that you said you were making that back in 2016, that sort of bank bot that had all these features, and you were trying to address features as well as depth at the same time. And, the interesting thing is that, Citibank, and some of the larger banks have been experimenting with these chatbots, trying to leverage off-the-shelf technologies or building stuff in-house. And they came up against that same issue, right? When you make very simple bots, whether you're leveraging NLP and state management and these other things, simple bots work really well. But when they began to scale out these really large implementations, things started breaking, because it is a huge scalability problem, even with the pre-existing tools that exist today, right? I mean, it's like, once you get into this like very large use case, it can be difficult to manage all of that, So I think people and companies and startups are still trying to figure that out today. So I think, maybe that's a good segue to my next question here. What were also some initial challenges that you would face too entering the space? I know you had mentioned, I think one of them you said was just taking the leap of faith and sort of saying, hey, AI is not that complicated. I don't need a PhD, right? And I think you sort of mentioned that one. What are some other challenges that you faced?
Well, I remember Greg's friend, Louis from the Holberton School. He at one of the sessions I attended there, he was talking about the learning curve for AI. And his point was that you spend 20% of time to learn 80% about AI. But when you get to the 80%, from then to a place where you would feel very comfortable, you have to spend the 80% of time. That 20% of your knowledge, which actually would make the difference, would take a very long time. Well, AI is there's a big hype out there about AI. Let me just share with you. People think that, okay, so you add this black box called AI and it will automatically give you answers, right? And the answer is no. There's no such thing. There's no such thing, because as we learn more about it, you realize that, all right, so the way it works is more like, the rear view mirror in the car. If you see pictures in this rear view mirror, then you can understand what's happening behind you. You have to have data. You have to have accumulated data so you could learn from that. Now, the thing about AI and current technologies is that you have to have a lot of data. Now, let me take this and talk a little about AlphaGo and essentially games and Atari games. If you can use Monte Carlo or simulation techniques to somehow synthesize and generate different states of, chess pieces arrangements or Go piece arrangements or Atari game situations, then you can create a lot of data. Once you have a lot of data, you have a good chance of learning from different situations. Now, when it comes to natural language processing, these states you cannot simulate these states because there are far too many variables and the rules are crazy. In chess, you have limited number of rules. I don't know the exact number, but it's a discrete finite number. But let's say in a 401k or a banking or let's say healthcare situation, variations could go crazy. Even for the duplex scenario that was brought up, that was demoed a few weeks ago, even that's use case. There are many use cases. There are far too many variables. Now, the challenge is how do you manage all these? And AI does not have, let's say, a silver bullet to address all of them. However, when you learn more about AI, and if you add the magic of the black art of product management to it, which has nothing to do with AI, but is just pure product management, you realize that there are ways to reduce degree of freedom. And there are ways to come up with a finite number of states, although these states have to be big enough, not like 5 states. You have to have, let's say, maybe 5,000 business use cases in which your chatbot can react to sensible inquiries generated by users, right? Now, when it comes to a 401k, all right, what are the top 80 inquiries that I might get from a user? It's not 5, 3, 4, or 10. It's more like 400 different inquiries, right, or 500, but it's not million. In other words, what I'm trying to get at is that you have to spend good amount of time to address these states, right? And you might ask, why do you need to even do that? Because there's a great incentive behind it. Like what? Let's look at it from a lead generation point of view. You spend a lot of time to produce content for inbound marketing, right? Blogs, vlogs, right? Banks spend a lot of money on that, or insurance, or professional services, or healthcare companies. But I just brought it up earlier at the beginning of the podcast that you have, let's say, 1,000 different blog posts. Now, if I land on one blog post, what are the chances of me going to the second blog post of yours, or maybe the third one, to categorically browse through everything? And how easy have you made it for me to search through your posts? The answer is not. I mean, you cannot really give me a solid answer. You cannot ask this question. You have to be able to answer this yourself in a comfortable way, and you realize that, okay, you know what? It's not that easy. So there's a great incentive to make it easier for your content to be foundable, to be reusable, to be repurposable, and chatbots are giving you that option. In a way, I asked Andrew Ng a question a few weeks ago at Startup Grind, and I asked him, Andrew, what do you think? How do you think chatbots are going to change the architecture of the content of the new Plannerai? And he said, we're working on it at Robot, and we're working on it at Planner as well. So, and I do believe if you can break down a blog post into smaller pieces that you could reuse, that would be a great way to make your content more reusable. If you make your content reusable, then you can create more complex pieces of content using these smaller Lego bricks, if you will, right? And you can create more buildings and more sophisticated components or a piece of content or components. So there's a great incentive to spend time to invest in reformatting, repurposing your content instead of curating or authoring blogs and vlogs. Maybe you can create shorter content. And you know what? It's not that hard to imagine how it would look like. Look at Twitter. We tweet, right? They are very short compared to a very long blog. And if you look at how these could be reused in, let's say, natural language conversation, then you would say, okay, you know, I do see where this is going. So you have to bring balance between what AI can do and how you should and should not use AI, and how you should or how you can make your content to work better with your AI. And product management plays a very major role right now. We do not have general AI. We're not going to have it for at least 5-10 years, or maybe more. And it's just a matter of how well you can make your content work for you. And there are many other incentives that I would be more than glad to share with you.
Absolutely. I think you touched on, a number of different areas, right? Not only from, the fact that, there's just all this data that already exists out there. Just
Right.
How do we properly extract it and leverage it in a way that enables us to create scalable conversational experiences, right? And I think that's the key point, right? It's just like so much of this data is already out there, but we just haven't been able to come up with a way to properly take advantage of it quite yet. So I think that's definitely something that I've heard from multiple people I'm talking to at this point. And, I think whoever comes up with that solution, they're going to be very successful, because I think that could definitely take chatbots really to this next level. And to the other point you're making too, which I think is definitely aligned to this, is the fact that, we definitely don't have artificial general intelligence yet. So we do have to go narrow. We do have to get very good at having these compartmentalized use cases and going very deep. And when we're talking about going very deep, right, I think there's a couple of components that I think one of them you mentioned was not only deep in the sense from a topical perspective of leveraging all of that information, whether it be blog posts or articles or, technical documents, and being able to transition between them in a seamless way, but also to be able to really try and, figure out how we can generate these conversations back to the user, right? It's leveraging this data. So I think you sort of alluded to the fact of maybe natural language generation a little bit, maybe what you're touching on.
That too. But again, that part is a very tricky part, because when it comes to, let's say, healthcare, and when it comes to, let's say, financial services, it's really tricky what you generate, because you can generate things that might not be necessarily true or legally true. I mean, because whatever you say has to be checked with your liabilities, and
right.
There's a legal aspect to it as well. And LLG is for sure a major component. We've produced raw material, and now from this raw material to something that could be rendered in a more natural and sensible way to consumers, you have to use some sort of generation or content generation? Would it be simple templating that people have used over the past 3 decades, or at least 10, 15 years? Or is it more like, generating using AI techniques to, let's say, right now we have the technology to summarize content or to generate content, but for a startup, although you can go fast and break things, but if you are playing in the financial services sector or in the healthcare sector, you have to be very careful on what you're putting out there. Otherwise, you won't be able to scale.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, I guess, Ollie, you and I are talking about sort of like where this next jump is going to be, right? Where this next, when people can actually walk around and everyone's telling you, yeah, this really good voice or chatbot experience, and the experience is really great and seamless, right? We're talking about, where things need to move to, right? So, maybe a good segue to this, and maybe something really relevant to actually this conversation here is, have you personally used any chatbot or voice instance that you thought was really good?
Sure. Well, over the last 3 years, I've learned how to use Alexa efficiently. I don't ask Alexa to tell me jokes. I don't ask Alexa to brew me a cup of coffee, but whether it gives me, I ask very complicated questions and it gives me the answer. There are certain things that they do very well, like the example that I said. What is the temperature today? I want to know if I have to grab a jacket. In San Francisco area, weather is crazy, right? You wake up early in the morning, it's cool, and then in the evening, it's like 20 degrees difference. So you want to know how to prep. So they're really good when it comes to things like that, and they're on all the time. And I ask different kind of questions. Yes, but when it comes to, let's say, asking deep conversation, they're not there yet. Obviously, they're not there yet. And let me just touch a little bit on the topic of repurposing your content. I believe the right way to go is not to create a technology to convert, let's say, I happen to have this book here, to convert maybe this book into conversations, but it would be easier to produce your content in a more conversational fashion. And that is an investment that companies have to be willing to do. And if they do that, then we have the technology to create true conversational agents, if you will. So have I created something that I'm willing to use? I would say I'm getting there. Yes, I'm getting there. And I don't have a kid right now, but I'm getting to a point where, I'm working on something, a prototype that would actually show that how a chatbot could actually coach people, save time. Because guess what? One of the other incentives behind chatbots is that you should be able to save time. There's a lot of information out there on the internet. Information overload is something that is killing people. And we want to do things very fast. Compare our lives to our parents. My father would come back home and then he would just open a book or maybe watch some TV or, play a game of backgammon with my mom, and that was it. That was his day. Now, our days, it's just, we're constantly, thirsty and hungry about something new. You're just looking into our cell phones. You're just crunching a ton of information day in, day out. And when you're looking for something, when you're searching for something or exploring for a piece of content, you're oftentimes faced with a lot of noise out there. Your chatbot should be able to collect pieces from here and there and give the most relevant content to you by cutting through the noise. And that's, again, something that chatbots are very capable of doing so in a very efficient way. And now, again, this idea just popping up that you need to own your content to do that. So you cannot create a chat. I mean, at least in my experience, I found it, if not impossible, I found it very difficult to create a chatbot to go and look into different websites to collect information, although Google has that technology. But it's not about, just finding pieces from, this page or that page or this book or that one. It's about creating a cohesive conversation. So you cannot just cherry pick content from here and there. You should be able to render a natural feeling conversation to your user.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think it's sort of aligning to my next question actually, which is where do you see current obstacles in chatbots? In the current time frame right now, provided what's possible. And I think you're sort of touching on one thing where it's just like best UX practices have not been established yet. What is good native conversations that are developed? And I think right now we're seeing some confusion, some testing, some things that are working. You're right. It's like you can't just take sentences from this website and FAQs from this website and put it in a chatbot and hopefully it's going to drive to something, because it's just not, right? So that's one sort of component or challenge that I see. And I think you certainly see the same thing. Can you talk maybe about some of the other obstacles or challenges that need to get solved before you and I can sort of come back maybe sometime in the next couple months or a year and say, chatbot and voice experiences are really good now?
Yeah, sure. Well, you have to, if you're an entrepreneur and trying to make a living out of what you're doing, you should be able to ask these tough questions, and you should be honest with yourself. Am I, what I'm putting out there, is it just nonsense, or does it actually work? And I've asked this questions many times for myself, and the answer is, let me just give you an example. If your product is used more than twice, more than brushing your teeth daily, then you have a good chance that this would have a future. Now, when it comes to chatbots, if you're picking up a scenario which people come across on a daily basis, then that's something that could be tested or validated pretty quickly. Now, the validation aspect of it is very important because it gives you a lot of hints or insights as how to rearrange or re-engineer your product. And after making a few failed attempts of creating different chatbots, creating health chatbots, creating fitness chatbots and whatnot, I realized that you have to focus on a pain that is real, a pain that makes people to still wanting to use something that is not still perfect. There's a little friction, but what they say, I as a user, I know that there's a friction, but I'm willing to swallow this and continue to use this product because it is giving me a cure that is helping me to alleviate my pain. And if your chatbot does that, it means that you have a chance of experimenting with your users, and you're in an area where you could be able to fine tune, play with the knobs as your users are using your system. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think definitely from like a business case, it's always about identifying that product market fit and, finding and validating your assumptions and finding something that people really want to use. So from maybe a foundational perspective, just with chatbots and voice at this point, in regards to best practices of whether it's UX or the interplay between UX and NLP and when we use each of those, or, things such as state and context management. Do you see any specific obstacles in those areas from a foundational level for the entire ecosystem that is holding experiences back per se?
Scalability is one of the big problems. Now, although you say I want to play in a narrow domain, it's a niche product, but are you able to gracefully handle everything, right? Sometimes you play tricks. Sometimes you feel that your chatbot is not really good in doing some things. Then you put buttons in your system. Sometimes, but you have to be careful. Is use with how you put the controls in your system. Is it the best way to communicate with my user? So the covers or the backups or the fallback scenarios that you put in place, are these the best way to keep users incentivized to use the system? And scalability is a great problem. Is a big problem I see, because you can create. We don't have the technology yet to like a magic powder, add it to a box and say, all right, you know what? I have this content, make it work for me. You get to do a lot of engineering. You have to do a lot of math behind it to make the content work for you. But I asked this question, I brought up this question that I asked of myself a couple of years ago, late in 2016, that creating dialogues won't help us. What is the next thing? And I noticed that there are two ways to make this scalable. One is to use simulation techniques, which we cannot use for natural language dialogues, or somehow relax how we deal with sequences, if you will. Right? And that's the case that we are focused on. So what we're working on right now and what we have created, and our latest product, our latest prototype is actually built on top of that, on top of this idea, that for things to be less complicated, because you can create mutations and you can have crazy number of states as a result of permutating different scenarios. But if you can relax that, then you have less number of states to deal with, although you can superimpose these states on top of each other and create, like Lego bricks, you can create more sophisticated states, if you will. But that would help a lot with how you deal with scalability. Now, there's another side to this, there's a flip side to this coin, and that is, okay, I see that how you're managing the number of states. How about the content that you have to generate, right? And there are some data processing techniques that you have to use to bridge the states to your content. And again, ETL and data processing is another part of it. How do you index your content? Do you have to index a full page, or do you have to index Twitter-like, conversation-ready, like pieces of content, if I'm making sense? And if you bridge these two, you have a better chance of scaling a lot faster. It's a really interesting perspective. Do you mind sort of maybe elaborating a little bit more by you saying you're relaxing sort of these states? I know you're sort of saying, the second way that you guys are sort of, building things, that methodology. Sure. Yeah. Sure. I cannot really reveal everything right now because one, we're still experimenting, although we have done we have had a lot of success with it. And the second is that sort of our secret sauce, but I'm more than happy to share more with the community, because my entrepreneurship coach taught me that you keep what you give away. You get to keep what you give away from Don Martell. So let me just give this to the community as a token of gratitude, and share that, yes, if you look at a conversation is a sequence of states. It starts with state 0 to state n, but these states can be mathematically added to each other. So let's say state alpha plus state beta is equal to a new state theta, right? How about state beta plus state alpha? It is still state theta. So if you have, let's say, state sigma, right? What are the building blocks of this state sigma? I don't know. You can permutate many of these states. Are there cases where sequence would matter? Absolutely. Who would tell you that? The business would tell you that, right? So by relaxing, you can drop you can reduce order of magnitude. You can reduce a degree of freedom, if you will. However, there are cases where sequence would matter, but there are cases, many more states in which sequence of states would not matter. For instance, I have a rash here in my elbow, and I believe I went swimming yesterday, and last night I had this cocktail. I had this cocktail last night, I went swimming yesterday, and I have this rash now. Now change the sequence. Doesn't really matter to a doctor. No, it doesn't. But if you say I had this rash, and I had this, took this, medication, and then this happened, yeah, the sequence of what you use will matter, definitely. So by relaxing, how these states can create more composite or hybrid states, we can, manage number of states. And that's something that we're very excited about. And we believe it's going to help a lot of companies, a lot of people to be better at managing different states. And second is that we're looking at is how we, which I cannot really talk about right now because we are still playing with it, but I'll be willing to give back to the community as soon as we get there, is how you process your content to bridge the gap between your content and these states. But I'm very hopeful that in near future we'll be able to create more scalable systems. And it is just about, how many states can you manage or model in your space model. If you can manage enough states, then it's a done deal. Now, companies like IBM Watson, they throw people at it. We believe right now with what we have a good chance of reducing number of resources and relying more on the technology, but yet still we need some resources. But we see the silver lining to get to a point where we would not need as many resources to take this to the next level.
That's really encouraging to hear that. So maybe, in the future when you guys have the announcement, definitely would like to sort of sync up and touch base on that, because it is interesting. I have talked to a couple of other companies that are sort of operating around the same challenge that they're trying to address, so I think there's sort of an arms race beginning to occur. Whoever can get to that, more scalable model first, right? It's sort of going to be able to eat their cake, right? So that is really fascinating. And, I think to that point, it's like whoever solves that, that gets us closer to whatever this sort of idealized vision of all these technologies and the interplay of multimodality coming into fruition. So to that point, what is Ali's vision of the future of chatbots and voice? Like in the next 5 years or maybe the next 10 years, like what do you see, our reality sort of becoming if all these things come and end up working out correctly?
Well, I have this conviction that the future search engines will become more like electricity grids that will just fade away. You won't feel as if there's something called like a search engine. They would operate more like connecting you to let's say an avatar of someone, or maybe a domain expert or a personal assistant or a business service that takes care of your requirements conversationally or interactively. The future of the internet is going to be interactive, more conversational and multimodal, for sure. We have short span of attention. We are addicted with instant gratification. We cannot change that. I look at my nephew and niece and you see them, they're just swiping their phones like this. And I'm like, why are you doing that? I mean, what's wrong? But this is how we're, used to using products, and we cannot change that overnight. So I do see that it's not just about voice. It's going to be a multimodal, conversational, more interactive internet in the future. If I wanted to compare this, a good analogy is you'll look at how the internet was created 30 years ago at CERN, where Sir Tim Berners-Lee first said, okay, I'm tired of categorically browsing for my content. If I'm looking for God's particle, I should not be worried about other metaphors for God's particle. Maybe someone else is calling it the boson Higgs, right? But it's another branch. It's another category. And categorical browsing is killing us. Why don't we just create a web? And he implemented the spec for the hypertext, and voila, that started the internet. Now the chatbot has the same, can play the same role here. And instead of us looking at all these pages, too much information overload, and that is causing a lot of paralysis, we can have chatbots or voice agents, if you will, or I'll call them bot agents. Or the term I'd like to use, which is not very marketable, is autonomous domain experts.
Sounds cool though.
Right.
Cool name though.
Yeah, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years we'll see more of them, and that's the picture that I see.
Cool. No, I love it. I really do like that idea of sort of like just ambient computing, right? It's like it's just gonna be this ever-present, very seamless and intuitive experience, right? We're just, I think you're right. I think when we get to that point, it's an electrical grid, right? We don't even like consider the components that really make it up anymore. It's just, I'm going to walk into a room and I know what I'm trying to achieve, and it's going to come very naturally, right? So I think that's a really exciting to potentially see these type of technologies really coming to this conclusion, very rapidly. Maybe the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be a drastically different world that we're living in. But I think that's very encouraging. Switching gears a little bit to maybe like present day and what the technologies can do. Have you seen any facts or insights about chatbots or voice that really surprised you? Maybe like discoveries you did on your own, and you thought one way, the data showed you something else, and it's like, that's really fascinating that people were interacting with the chatbot that way, or building your own NLP engine. That was an interesting insight, or something like that.
Well, I really learned something new. Not with a negative sentiment, but I've seen more inspiring and encouraging facts coming out, and there are setbacks too. For instance, the anxiety behind losing jobs is real, and we talk to people. I was talking to this gentleman from McKinsey, and he was really anxious about chatbots have the ability to essentially mislead you. It's beyond fake news. If you're cutting through the noise, as you would say it, and if your followers really believe in you, what if you start spreading wrong ideologies, right? Not that we're capable of doing it right away, but this is very troubling. At the same time, if you look at the technology and truly understand the technology, you see that, all right, if I have to produce my content and my chatbot is as good as my content, and there are ways to validate my content, the ecosystem provides enough checks and balances to validate my content, then that's not something that might happen very easily. But certainly there will be companies, communities, organizations, or God forbid, governments to start creating chatbots and do their own propaganda.
That's a really interesting point, and I think it's sort of a balancing, right? Because on one hand, there is the opportunity for people to misuse them. But on the other hand, I think you raise an interesting point where it's like, if an organization, let's just say a nonprofit, for example, has a chatbot and their content is curated to specifically what their mission and vision is, it's a direct channel to that company. There's no obfuscation from a blog or mainstream media trying to interpret what they're trying to achieve. It's a direct sort of link to them. So I think that's a really interesting point, because it's sort of this balancing effect that will become more apparent as these things evolve.
Right. So again, you can create good chatbots, you can create malicious chatbots, you can create really good ones. But again, your content is as good, your chatbot is as good as your content. And if you produce your content in such a way that would address these use cases or these states, then you have a good chance to be able to create something that is entertaining or usable for users.
Definitely.
The anxiety is real, but I have news for those who are anxious, and that is, if I can create content, and if that content could work on my behalf when I'm not available, right? What does it mean? It means that I'm being more productive. And if as a nation we're more productive, that means better GDP, right? The math is very simple. Now, I understand the anxiety around all this, but if we do not do this, someone else will do, right? And that is something that's a big incentive. I do not see it as something intimidating. I do believe that if I can create enough, right now, if you're for branding, you create a lot of posts, but your posts are static. But if you can make your posts to interactively and dynamically communicate with many users, then you have a better outreach.
Right. The act is like force multipliers, right? That significantly expand what our capabilities are. I absolutely agree. I think those are all great points.
Just one last thing, I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah.
are getting to a point where we can democratize the search. If you're producing content, you have more power. You can start, owning. You can have more control over your content that you're producing, and you can have better ROI on from your content.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think, we see the internet now, and a lot of these platforms that have emerged specifically to enable people to create this content. But, I think maybe an overarching theme of this entire conversation is the fact that a lot of that content is not accessible, right? So although it gives people a platform and a voice, it's very difficult sometimes to extend that conversation or for people to even access it. So I think that's a very valid point. So maybe switching gears just a little bit, so you've certainly been in the space maybe a little longer than most people. So people that are just entering this space now, can you recommend any best practices that you've sort of uncovered and you've seen working successfully for yourself?
Sure. Well, there are many ways to skin the cat, and there are many ways to realm, if you will. But I can just speak about my own experience. I feel that you need to have a good, not very deep, but at least basic understanding of AI and NLP. It would be very helpful if you understand it. If you understand what AI can do and what are the things that AI cannot do. And for that, I would highly recommend Coursera, especially the deep learning course that was released maybe less than a year ago. Udemy has good material as well. Udacity has good material as well. Find a good mentor wherever you live. There are good people. Here in Bay Area, we're fortunate to have access to many good mentors, great meetups as well. People like Gregor Renner, like Louis, like a good author whose books frequently, Jason Brownlee, also Jill Link, who was a great mentor, AI mentor of mine, and Andrew Ng. And there are good classes at Stanford, good talks at Stanford led by Chris Manning and his folks. So look into AI material. You do not need to become an expert, but you need to spend, I'd say, 3 months is not enough, but 6 months to a year would give you good understanding of what AI is or NLP is, and look for a good mentor and play with all these toys. You do not need to develop your own NLP or NLU component, if you will. You may use existing ones, but you have to feel comfortable to play the long game here. We're not at a stage where you would say, all right, I spent 3 months it's like learning JavaScript or CSS or React, and then I would be a developer. No, you have to you have to invest for a year or something like that. Then you can start saying, okay, you know what? I can create chatbots. And I'd be able to answer questions as well.
Cool. No, I think that's great advice. Those are great book recommendations and people to follow. That being said, I will sort of give you the floor for a couple of minutes. So, let the people know what sort of stuff you're working on, where they can find you at, maybe a speaking event or a meetup, and what you have in store for Planner.ai in the near future.
Sure. We are a consulting company at the moment. We are looking for companies that are willing to play with chatbots and create a new channel to communicate with their users. We believe that this medium has the potential to maximize your outreach, to augment your marketing funnels, to better retain your customers, nurture your leads. And our technology is more scalable compared to other products out there. And right now, our focus is within the healthcare, and also we're looking at financial services as well. And be more than glad to talk to you. You can find me at Planner.ai or sales@Planner.ai. Our website is It's a startup website. We do not put a lot of stuff out there, but I'd be more than glad to have a cup of coffee with you, or a Zoom or a Skype session.
Cool. Last question before we conclude the podcast. I always ask all the guests, just working in the startup space and working on these really complex problems, sometimes it can seem overwhelming. So for you, what sort of keeps you motivated and inspired to continually sort of get out there and test new things and continue trying to solve and sort of build this new future?
The conviction that the future is going to be more conversational. Again, we have this opportunity now to make our content work for us. We can transcend our thoughts into avatars that could interactively communicate with users using the content that we generate. There's no free lunch. Don't get me wrong, but if you are patient enough to produce your content, to publish your content in such a way that the chatbot could render it to your users, then this future is a very vibrant and sought after future, I would say.
Cool. I love it. There's lofty goals and, a lot in store. So, Ali, I appreciate the time and all the insights and the conversation, and we'll definitely love to have you back in the near future.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.